Good afternoon, everyone, and we're going to go ahead and get started promptly at 4:30, just to make sure that we afford you the opportunity to go home this evening and have dinner with your family. Hopefully, we'll be conscientious of your time this evening. So, first and foremost, happy Monday, and this has been a very long and thorough process of taking into account the information that we've received, and I do appreciate the community's flexibility in allowing us to do our due diligence in analyzing the bids, so that the recommendations that we have as an administrative team and the conversation that the board is going to have publicly today is as best as it can be at this particular point in time. So just as a reminder, this is a meeting to discuss the high school additions and renovations bid and funding budget review. Keep in mind that the bids that we received are bids specific to the high school renovation and additions. This does not include the bids for the field project, as those bids have yet to be received and opened. So getting started, wanted to have a conversation on perhaps some historical information. If you've been a part of following this project, you will remember that dating back to March of 2021, we had estimates for the high school addition and renovation part of our project set by Crabtree and Rohrbach at $33,911,430. The bids that we received in the latest soft cost estimates total $42,358,467. And if you do the math, which we've done for you, you will see that the estimated cost over the original March of 2021 estimates is 25% higher. So that's the first piece of information that I wanted the board and the public, and for those of you who are joining us virtually as we are live streaming this as well, to be aware of. So taking that information and really breaking down the additions and renovation project cost estimates by contractor and base bids, you will see on the screen the general contractor base bid broken down at $23,907,000, the HVAC bid at $3,990,000, the plumbing base bid at $1,596,200, the electric base bid at $4,335,000, with a total base bid of $33,828,200. As you might be aware, if you've been following the project and how we bid this, there were a series of alternates, alternates added to this project so that we could see what those costs would be. The selected alternates were totaling $3,988,840. So taking the total bid project cost of $37,817.40, with the architect, engineer, and other soft costs, and a contingency of little over $4.5 million, gets us to the estimated costs that you saw on the first screen of $42,358,467. So again, I talked to you a little bit about the alternates that were included as part of the project. I'll just name them and then I'll give you the total. The unclassified construction, window replacements, window shades, painting, paving of the staging area and the laydown area, paving of the driveway staging and laydown area, piping for heat pumps and HVAC at the lower house, for a total of $3,988,840. So some of the alternates that we are not including, based on the way things came back, is the 30-year roof, the counterweighted rigging in the auditorium, some acoustic shells that are movable, science labs at the high school, and skylights in building units B and C. So there are a little over $1.8 million of alternates that we did not include as conversation piece for today. All of this information, just as a point of clarification, we've spent a great deal of time as a district leadership team in analyzing all of these things to at least bring to the board some things that would engage them in conversation and discussion moving forward in discussing this project. So again, I want to talk specifically to what we shared with the community, to be extremely transparent with our stakeholders. If you remember back to the time period when we were discussing this project, we had discussed the estimates, rounding this borrowing, so to say, of the bond to $40 million initially. And throughout the course of time, we do realize that we started having conversations about purchasing land and potential escalations of this project. So the board did authorize the borrowing of $45 million, and the borrowing of $45 million did not indicate that the board was planning to spend that $45 million. That was borrowing for the sake of being prepared for land and for additional escalation in costs of a project over time. So those $2 figures are extremely important when we have this discussion this afternoon. 40 million versus 45 million, and I'll leave it at that for now because I know that that is going to come up again in conversation. So taking a look at the high school additions and renovation, we started at $40 million, and you can look at the 34,378 figure that's highlighted in yellow, plus the estimates for the high school field projects of 5.6, a little over $5.6 million, which gives us the $40 million figure. So looking at the total borrowing of $45 million, you can see the breakdown there. As I referenced, the land purchase being included as part of the borrowing. So what does that mean from the estimates of where we are in funding this project? If you look to the far right bottom corner, you will see the dollar figure of $6,489,337. In essence, that is what we are underfunded at this particular time in terms of this comprehensive project that we have been discussing for the better part of a year or so. So, moving into the discussion phase, because this is a board discussion, I just wanted to provide the context as to where we are and potential options moving forward. And wanted to draw attention to the legal process that we're held to in terms of accepting or rejecting bids. So from the date of opening, we have 30 days to make a board decision regarding whether we accept or reject bids for a particular bid opening. So that deadline day is April 7th of 2022. So it is our intent that utilizing the board meeting on April 4th, that is the board meeting where the board will take official action as to their intent with this particular bid opening and notify the contractors whether or not the project will proceed or whether or not the board plans to reject the bids. So I want to talk about two particular options that may set the stage for at least the beginning discussion as the board moves forward with that in the public realm. So option one, accept the bids. Move forward with awarding the bids as proposed. This means that the board wants to proceed with the high school renovation and additions project and is willing to commit the funding to the project as presented with the proposed alternates. So going back to the dollar figure, proceeding with that $42 million, a little over $42 million figure. Based on this information and knowing that this is just the high school renovation and additions project, based on the original borrowing, there are insufficient funds based on that if the board were to accept the bids for the field project to be included as part of the project. Now, keep in mind also that the opening of the bid for the fields is not happened yet. So as a board, the focus of the conversation today is just on the high school renovation and addition project. So option 2 is that the board could reject the bids and place the project on hold and consider rebidding in the future. You know, just what this means is that the board would conduct another bidding process at a future date or potentially revisit our current priorities. So not to not be transparent, but based on the information that I've seen, my recommendation lies in option 2, because I personally believe, professionally believe, that a 25% cost escalation is excessive, although it's nobody's fault. I think that there has been public conversation at our public board meetings, comments and public participation that has made some very direct statements and questions regarding that particular issue. So now that we have the bids in, we know what the numbers are. I think the conversation from the board level can take place, and what I would like to suggest, if the board is accepting of this, is to start that conversation with the finance chair, to give the perspective of finance with Sean McCrae as well, to then move on to Mr. Case, who is the chair of the Facilities Committee, which Mr. Negrini also serves on, and then Mrs. Cocker, who is the extracurricular chair, for her to give her comments, followed by Mr. Martin, who is the co-chair of that committee, and then go to the other board members for their conversation on whatever their thoughts are, so that everyone has an opportunity as a board to share their perspective. Please keep in mind that my recommendation is only my recommendation based on my professional experience, and by no means will you hurt my feelings if you don't accept my recommendation. But I have a responsibility as superintendent to make sure that my recommendations are grounded in what is best from a financial standpoint for the district moving forward. Now, I don't hold a crystal ball, and I don't know if we delay bids, if that means that we're going to get better prices in the future. That, I think, is open to some debate based on what your perspective is in terms of prevailing wage, what your perspective is on the supply chain, what your perspective is on what the future might hold in an uncertain economy that we currently live in, based on all of the things that are going on, both in our country and the world that are currently happening. So with that said, I will be quiet because it's not Dr. Fadley's discussion, it's the board's discussion, and I'd like to start with Mr. Negrini, if that's acceptable.
Thank you, Dr. Fadley. A couple of points to be made in the analysis of this decision. First and foremost, regarding the ad alternates, that figure, I think, is north of $3 million, almost $4 million. If we could have some more information from administration, Mr. Simcox, as to, one, why we would want to move forward with those specific ad alternates as opposed to not moving forward at all with those ad alternates, which obviously significantly reduces those bids. And then obviously, secondly, from the point that you were making, which is a difficult one for us, knowing where we are currently with inflation, knowing where we are currently with supply chain issues, whether or not, if this board, as it currently sits, wants to move forward with this project, whether or not down the road, should we explore this a year from now, whether we're looking at higher costs than what is currently put forth. And understanding that that is a difficult question to answer, but whether or not we could price ourselves out even further by delaying this. And I'm not suggesting in any way that we should or we shouldn't delay. That's obviously will be voted upon next week, but ultimately from a financial standpoint, it is a factor for this board to make, understanding what may be an overall cost 12 months from now. But going back to my original point, if I can hear to the reasons why we would have to go forward with the recommendation of these alternate selections, that puts us $4 million over the base bids, and whether or not some of these things down the road, which could be at a reduced cost, or some of which we might be able to even do in-house, such as painting, et cetera, the basis behind the recommendations for these base bids, please.
So I think the best way to proceed with that is to ask Mr. Simcox to come to the microphone first and talk through the selected alternates, because there are very good reasons why these were selected as opposed to others. So, Mr. Simcox, can you kind of walk through each one of those alternates?
Sure.
And give the why behind the selection of these?
Absolutely. So the unclassified construction, for those of you who, didn't live in the construction world, is that the contractor would own rock excavation, over excavation, anything they come up with, based upon the borings that we did previously, and we used ground penetrating radar also, so we would have a good handle on what's under the ground. So this is for the electrical excavation, any of the GC excavation. All of the different prime bidders own any of the rock excavation with this. Looking at what the price per cubic yard would be if we didn't take this, I truly believe we would greatly exceed this. So with this, they own that. So we're not going to get hit with an extra. We did the borings. We have the rock. And just for those of you that remember PP&L working 2 years ago on Dwight Street, there's a no blast area here. It has to do with the old Brenneman Quarry and everything that got disrupted years ago. If we can't blast, so if we hit rock, it's a matter of a hydro hammer, excavator with a hammer, or a type of fracking to get rid of the rock to go. It's a very expensive. That's what as PP&L said, that's what put them sort of underwater on their project, which was their business, certainly not ours. So that's why I'm suggesting we go with the unclassified construction. It's basically for the what we don't see on top of the ground. We know there's a great lot of...
Mr. Simcox, if I could just interject. The unclassified construction alternate that was selected was basically, if you want to think about it this way, it's an insurance policy to keep what we don't know that's underground. If there are issues with rock and the removal of rock and the excavation of rock, if they're not owned by that insurance policy and that unclassified construction, those dollar figures, the 130, 940, can be eaten up very quickly, and it could cost the district an excessive amount of money to mitigate that issue.
3 to 4 times what I think is included in there.
And the type of land that we currently have built upon, as is evident by the issues that we saw along the road with PennDOT and their issues with running into the rock issue, are it's very realistic that we could be in the same situation as they were. So in Mr. Simcox's experience, those things were built into the project to protect the district from excessive expense in that particular area.
That's correct. Now, if I may, I'm going to go to the bottom and work our way up because I think that's it's a little more understandable. So going down to the bottom, the HVAC at Lower House. So the HVAC system at Lower House, it's not if, it's when. I don't want to wait until it fails. It's a failing system. It's very old. It's one of our oldest systems we have here in the district. And it's something that whether we do it now in this project or we do it in a year, and this is slated actually in the construction program for, it would be the summer of 2023, but that's to do a total HVAC replacement. Ceilings come down, it would be new drop ceilings, and then the existing lighting is LED, so we have them putting that back in. So it's only labor only, we're not redoing the lights because we've upgraded those over the past couple of years, so we have the LED fixtures in there now. So that's a necessity for the Lower House.
Mr. Simcox, just to I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to make sure that we make the points that are important when we're talking in terms of expense after the fact. So building that in as an alternate into this project and receiving the alternate of $3 million would more than likely, based on your experience, be much cheaper than if we would have come after the fact and said, and not made it an alternate and said we need to replace that HVAC system at the Lower House.
To coin a phrase, they already have boots on the ground, so the HVAC contractors that are working on the high school, that's bid in with that, so they would be the same contractors. So their materials, their buying power increases. Theoretically, as that increases, our price goes down. So now going in there, that's in the parentheses there, the piping for the heat pump units, that's a deduct alternate. So that would be a deduct to go. So we've been back and forth with that piping system 3 or 4 times. Knowing that copper's up 76% right now, we decided not to go with copper in our heating system, so they're looking at CPVC, which takes a little bit more unistrut and support structure, but it's going to be quite a bit cheaper in the long run, and there's no compromise in the life expectancy. Corrosive waters and everything, we dissected some of the pipes that are in the Lower House now, and they asked if they could be left. They could be left to just continue to spring leaks. You know, I absolutely don't recommend that. So that's that. The paving of the contractor staging and laydown area, the paving of the staging and the driveway and the staging and laydown area. This is the large area in the student parking lot in the driveway that we did the first year I was here. If you remember back, it had potholes the size of Volkswagens. Nothing against Volkswagens, but it was pretty bad. So we repaved that and did a full depth. We did a bus or a truck spec on that. So we did a 19 millimeter binder, stone, geotextile, everything in there to make it structurally sound. It's holding up wonderfully. As they come in with contractors' equipment and potential damage anything, they would do what was called soft and yielding. So they would go down through and check it. We would run a loaded truck on it. If there's any areas that look like they've been damaged at all, if it yields and pumps, it would be a total replacement. Otherwise, it's a scarify and top. So it's priced to mill and pave, which would give us a new surface on top. They will damage some. So we put that into there. It's an alternate that we could get out of and evaluate later, but at this point, while we're in there, these are all, in my opinion, to safeguard the district from a ton of change orders later. I know everybody's familiar with change orders and what that can do to your budget. I'd rather know up front what we're up against rather than knowing at the end. So that's why that's in there. When we get up to the alternate 3, 7, and 8, so to do the new HVAC system, the windows down in there are, I can't tell you exactly how old, but I know that they're the same windows that were in when I went to the Lower House. They leak, they're drafty. When we're doing an HVAC system and trying to get efficiency, the windows, there are some doors that I noticed during my walkthroughs that were compromised. They're actually in the base bid. So this is windows only. The window shades at Unit A are basically the window treatments that go over. We wanted to include those in because I don't want them to go back into soft costs and into furniture later, so we know ahead of time what we're doing. There's, classroom windows and shades kind of go hand in hand as far as sunlight, traffic, whatever. The painting of the corridors at Unit A were put in there. As Mr. Negrini said, could painting be done in-house or later? It could. The only thing is, these are the old tile walls. So what this is actually a two-part epoxy paint and coating, which would go in. So this includes, I put in about 200 square foot of tile repair and replacement because there's tiles there. It's multicolored. Quite honestly, the hallways of Lower House are not aesthetically pleasing. They may be marginally functional. So this is to patch the tile and then do a complete two-part overspray of epoxy. That's something, it's kind of a specialty item to do that. If it were just painting on tile, quite honestly, a fingernail tends to remove them. I mean, you can prime it properly and paint. You have a fighting chance of it lasting a little while, but this is a complete epoxy system on all of the hallways and corridors throughout Lower House. So when you're going from, potentially, if the board decides to do it, you're going from the construction project at the high school, the new connecting corridor, which I know I've priced several times over the years, so it's been something on a wish list for a long time, going into the new renovated area at the Lower House, and then you walk in and it looks like everybody forgot about behind that door and went back. That's why we put in with the new drop ceilings, the cleanup. That's why that painting is in there under that. Typically, under just a normal painting, we could consider doing it later, whatever. The epoxy paint, we put in with the contractor that was there. So that's kind of why that shows up there.
And Mr. Simcox, regarding the HVAC, obviously I've sat on facilities for a number of years. We have a 5-year capital project dealing with roofs, HVAC, et cetera. I imagine that this has been, in the works for a period of time and coming out of our capital fund in anticipation of some of these bigger projects. Is this not something that we've looked at in our 5-year plan, and has it been slated for this year? Has it been slated for, 2-3 years down the road? And again, I recognize that each year we seem to reassess what our priorities are in terms of roofs or, HVAC or other big ticket items, lighting. Where does this currently stand in the last 5-year plan that we've worked on? And ultimately, I know that you say that, it's preferable to do it now, but ultimately, if this was slated to take place 2 years down the road out of our capital fund as opposed to out of our bond here?
Well, as I've been putting together, I won't talk about historically, but when I came here, I wanted to look at, assess a lot of the things in this district to kind of put a game plan together. So when I looked at first, my thing is always, when you build from a strong foundation up. When you remodel or you protect, you start from the roof and work your way down. So I went down through the roofs. Roof leaks were not, they were more than common. So we went down through and had a comprehensive plan. We used a 2019 A bond, and we redid the roofs. So as we go down through here right now, we have warranties on our roofs out to 2034. So my intention is to budget out, I'm shooting for 2040. It's going to take a little bit more work, but I'm looking at gym floors, bleachers, just all the little entities, as we discovered, of course, the gym sound system, the turf, as we go in and put everything in. The actual HVAC system for down there, and Christine, correct me if I'm wrong, they never really had a real capital pot to the magnitude that it would take to redo that. Is that a fair statement?
Christine, can you come to the microphone? I don't, I know that there are people watching virtually that may not be able to hear you unless you speak.
Sure. In 2019, the district borrowed about $11 million. to address many capital needs throughout the district. And that's around the same time then when Mr. Simcox came on board, and we looked at the priorities, and those priorities were rearranged based on what he said in his experience. So then as we were kind of going through, that's about the same time then we started with the feasibility study, looking at that, and we continue to reprioritize and reassess things like gym floors and all the things that Mr. Simcox was talking about. So when this became part of the high school project, then we look at our funds. We have about $8 million in capital reserves right now. We've been looking at trying to do a 10-year plan. We're about 8 years out, and as the further you go out, it gets a little less precise. But we're looking at potentially spending, if we would have no further infusion of money into the capital reserve fund, we would spend that $8 million over the next 10 years. But in saying that, and as the group in the district leadership team meets and we look at priorities and the funding sources, the HVAC, because it became part of the high school project, then those funds kind of shift into other priorities. So I'm not saying that the district never acknowledged that, probably not to the cost that we're seeing now. But as the district moved towards the feasibility study and that being part of the high school project, then those monies and priorities and budgets can shift. Now, that being said, we look at it almost every month right now as we're looking to the due date of spending down the 2019A bonds. So those priorities can be shifted, of course, as we look at, the funding availability for what the district needs to do. Is that helpful?
So where are we at in terms of spending down that 2019A bond in terms of what has been committed to projects or future projects? What is left out of that particular fund that may, again, if we were to suggest that that could be utilized for that HVAC add-on bid, and taking that out of the equation that has obviously increased the costs of this project significantly?
So right now, I don't have it in front of me, but the remaining funds that are left in there are for the majority of the buses that have been already committed by the district on purchase orders. They'll be coming in the May-June timeframe. There were some other projects that we were reviewing. Off the top of my head, I don't think it was exactly to the level of availability of the HVAC project. I know that we have commitments for the food service fund, and there were also, we were looking at some projects, the lobby at the administration building, and some other athletic types of investments. But I'm not sure off the top of my head how much we could literally divert now. And there is, again, and we'll talk about that later too, about the time frame of spending that money. That wouldn't preclude us from switching gears at this point, but I don't think we'd have enough in the 2019A bonds to then do the HVAC project. But
Actually,
you can comment to that.
Yeah, we're down, Mr. Negrini, down to, I'm going to say that's not 100% totally committed. We're down to about $100,000. That's about all of the 2019A bond that hasn't been committed. 2 projects that are deemed necessary, not frivolous in any way. So we used it for roofing. We've used it for a great deal of major project buses. Trying to think of all of the different things. Food service. Last check-in with Sarah, I think she was within $6 of her budget. So we're very close on that.
There's also a lot of paving projects.
Right. So it's, to throw that, it's almost, it's negligible. So at less than $100,000 to throw at a, potentially, if you're looking at all in, and you take out some of the paving stuff, you're looking at about $3,750,000. So to throw $100,000 at that would, it's just not, there's not enough left in that to even probably talk about. And most all of that money has been allocated. Some of the money, as Christine said too, is like, I've prioritized things as safety first. So like when you go down through some of the cracks and some of the concrete work that we've repaired or replaced, like the asphalt, like if you go out to Green Valley around the playground, some of the large voids and stuff, we can't really get onto that till mid-April because of as far as the tar fill and stuff. But those are the first priorities out of that budget, just to sort of maintain our buildings in safety as much as we can. We do have, and it's definitely a concern, our HVAC systems, very little thought is given to things as long as they're still working that you don't see. You know, aesthetics, you see it, it's a big difference. People walk in and they see. The base, though, is we've got to keep, you know, our buildings climate controlled. We have to keep, you know, the water and sewer systems and everything up and running if you're going to put kids in buildings. So I think that, I don't know if that helps at all.
I think I've taken up enough time, considering there's going to be lots of other questions.
Mr.
I may come
McCray,
around later, but thank
Mr.
you.
McCray, I think I said you were second as co-chair of the Finance Committee, certainly, and then we'll go on to Ed and back to Jay, and then Steph and Mike, and try to make it so that every board member has an opportunity to share their concerns, questions, and opinions, to initiate other discussion if that is something the board wants to do.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Fradley. Actually, Jeff, you can stay there.
I can stay here?
You can stay there.
Okay.
Absolutely. But thank you to you. Thank you, Dr. Fradley, and your administration for all the time that you put into obviously going through the bidding process, the analysis that you guys are presenting here tonight. I know this is just the kind of the window dressing on all the hours of work that went into the analysis that's behind it. So one more time, thank you guys for all of that. I don't have any better crystal ball than you do, Dr. Fadley, or Mr. Negrini or anything else about what it would mean to put on hold and rebid in the future. I guess the one question I'll ask right now is going back to, we looked at the alternates that we included. Can we go back to the slide with the alternates that we didn't include? I would, one thing that kind of jumps out to me is obviously we're looking at a project that, first of all, I think one of the key things to me is the safety aspect of connecting the two buildings. Frankly, I'm not trying to disparage, passports or anything like that, but it's frustrating that we're this far along in the history of those two buildings and we've never actually connected the two buildings from a safety perspective. So I think that's something that would be imperative for us to do, relatively speaking, sooner rather than later. That being said, I guess my question is here, obviously the one thing that stands out here as academically oriented is the science labs. So beyond the price tag, can you talk to maybe why science labs weren't included in the alternates that you recommended including?
Well, they were always listed as an alternate.
Sure.
Okay, so that being said first, so do you want me to go down through the ones that weren't chosen?
Maybe it's probably might be
I'll give you
more
the
time.
Reader's Digest version of it.
Sure.
So a 30-year roof warranty, looking at the 200,000. So there's, for lack of a better phrase, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So you look at the 20-year, so it's a fully adhered EPDM, John Mansville roof system, which is what we've been putting on all of the other buildings, and sticking with the quality product. That's what was spec'd. Or I should say, that's the spec we used. They could use an alternate material, but it's got to meet the same spec. So in a 20-year roof warranty, there's ways to extend that out to 40 years. So there's coatings, there's different things that can be done at a future date 20 years out. So that's something that we could take a different avenue to get 40 years at. To do a 30-year, even a 30-year, we'd have to look at, one of the reasons why we did complete renovations in the roofs, because we never met the 2015 res check. So there wasn't insulation on the roofs that we've done so far. So at Southern and also at the lower house and the high school, we went with the tapered system, the insulation, to meet the insulation code requirements going forward. Would we have been grandfathered just to coat it? Quite possibly, but we wouldn't have been getting the full thing. And when I looked at the coatings as we priced them out, were real close to what the replacement was. So that isn't something that that I think we all deemed as necessary. The counterweighted rigging is a deduct alternate.
Mr. Simcox, before you go on to the second item, can you explain to the board the difference between the millage, the mill thickness, not millage, the mill thickness between the 20-year roof and the 30-year roof? And you've already, I think, done a nice job of sharing with the board the applications that can be done towards the end of a 20-year roof life cycle, that would extend that warranty for perhaps another 20 years or 10 years, depending on the application that you chose. In a nutshell, what is the difference between a 20-year roof and a 30-year roof?
Just the millage of the material that goes
So
on
the
top.
thickness of the application, the rubber
The
application on
EPDM
top?
rubber, it's a different thickness. You know, all other things being equal, the trim, everything else that goes on there, the insulation, everything else stays the same. It's basically just the top dressing. And as we assess roofs going down through, say, as we get out 10 to 15 years, we assess and other little things. The warranty, all it really means is that they will come back to fix what they have done. It doesn't mean you're never going to have a problem with it, but I think that by sticking with the spec we have, we get good quality applicators too, along with
Yeah. And I think it's important to again highlight that throughout the course of the last several years, in your leadership and advice to the board on the roofs in our existing other buildings, those roofs have been set up for, I would say, lack of issues in terms of extreme cost up until the year
2034. We're up to now in
2034.
warranty.
So
Right.
our other building roofs, you've utilized the applications to some of those roofs that we're talking about for going a 30-year roof to a 20-year roof in some of those other facilities to bring them up to standard,
Yeah, and
to
there's-
give
there's-
those additional warranties.
I mean, a 20-year roof may be somewhat common, and it gets us out to beyond what I was calling my goal of being out to 2040. So by going to a 20-year roof, it's a good product, it's a good roof. If given the opportunity and if we had an unlimited budget, going to a 30-year roof is fine, but there's other ways to
Thank you.
extend that. The counterweighted rigging, to get back to safety again, as we talked about, that's a deduct alternate. So we're not going to take the deduct, so the counterweighted rigging is actually mechanical. So that was one of the things, I think, Mr. Fairchild, Dr. Trickett, it was pretty much a requirement. Mr. Negrina, we talked about that at facilities, Mr. Case, that was sort of something for the safety of the students and the amount of work and stuff, that would be something we would not be, we would stay with the mechanical. We wouldn't take the deduct on it. The Sonata convex acoustic shells, I had to defer to Mr. Fairchild on that because I am not a theatrical expert by any means. So these are just freestanding acoustic, much, I guess I'll liken them to the speakers that are sitting over there. They sit there in a directional, they're furnishings. So they can be added at any time without any labor. They can be purchased and set in there, and sometimes, you know, even going down through, and we could price them even possibly using like a CoStar's type of thing if it does save money. It doesn't always. That's something that could be added later. So there was no, knowing the budget constraints, I didn't think there was any reason, and after talking to Mr. Fairchild, he definitely agreed with that. Science labs, so that has a lot to do with the cost. That's just the science labs that would be constructed in the rear of what would now be the vacated lower house cafeteria.
There's like the cafeterias, okay.
Right. So one of the things we were looking at is, I went back several times. There's a heating system back in the corner there. It was actually missed the first time. We added it back in when I did a walkthrough with Crabtree. But I want everything plumbed and piped for this. So that's included in the base bid. So basically, at the end of the day, for the science labs, they can be, the space is already, it's not an additional space on the outside of the building, it's an interior space that would be what we would call a fit out. So at that time, That was, there again, when it gets into, I try to defer to whoever is best suited at that time. When it comes to curriculum, that's not what I do. I mean, all the time. I guess I get into a little bit now, but I wanted to know, like, what, if that's a point of contention that we could put off. So basically, we're, for lack of a better term, we're pre-plumbed for it, so the mechanical's in there. My goal is to not tear out $10. That's why we stopped on the canopy at the auditorium, because as I was on the roof and doing walkthroughs on the roofing, some of that gets torn off on the plans. Took me a little while to convince everybody that that was going to happen, the contractors, but that's why we didn't do that roof on a canopy. And first of all, if a canopy does leak a little bit, it's not like it's going to be derogatory to our building structure. It's simply the canopy itself.
So just for total clarification, obviously, as the bid stands now, without this alternate, it would basically be, like you said, pre-plumbed, empty space or unused space at this time, if we went forward.
It would be as it sits now.
Yeah.
It would be the cafeteria with the windows and everything. Could be used as educational space. I mean, I'm sure, any space given they'd be more than happy to take, but it would not be configured as a set of 4 science labs.
Yeah.
And then the skylights at buildings, unit B and C. So if you've looked up and you've walked through the high school and you've looked at the skylights, we're not talking about atriums here with, big glass enclosures where you walk underneath and all of a sudden it looks like you're outside. These are simply skylights. From a contractor's perspective, skylights, leak. We fix more skylights than any other thing, so that just seemed like a thing. Now, so I wanted to talk to them too about what type of skylights and how much light transmission would come through. We got through that. I made the recommendation that the skylights go because at that cost, it's going to cost us, it's going to create problems down the road, and the light transmission was so minimal that I didn't think it was worthwhile spending.
From a, I guess, a contractor relationship perspective, if we were to, reject the bids and rebid either the full project or a simpler project or a smaller project or whatever, how do you anticipate contractors will react to that?
Well, I mean, it costs money to bid, so
Sure.
everybody that put a bid out there has skin in the game. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, but in my previous life, that's what we did for a living. I mean, that's part of your life. So you bid projects. You don't get them all. You really don't want to get them all. Many times you'd be underwater if you did. I'm sure the low bidder wouldn't be happy about it, as nobody would blame him. But I think in these economic times, I think anybody that wouldn't understand what's being done when you're that far over budget and the uncertainty. I mean, as we went into this, and I've been monitoring with RS Means, which I rejoined just to kind of keep track on things. So we were up like 75 and 80% on lumber. Lumber peaked and curtailed. Right now we're up, last week's meeting, we were 28% up on concrete, 76% up on copper, 30% up on piping. So steel is really uncertain right now. So all of these have fluctuated. The only thing I will say is, looking at the lumber has peaked and rolled back down again. Is that what's going to happen with all the other building materials? And then we're, of course, we're not Davis-Bacon or HUD, we're actually in regular Pennsylvania L&I prevailing wages, which has a lot to do with what union rates are. So rates everywhere, I mean, you can see the signs everywhere, people are paying more for labor than they have in ever. So that's going up slightly. Where that will stop and what effect that will have, I can't tell you. Personally, I don't see labor rates going back down, but building materials, the ones that are peaked are on the way back down. Fuels, what's happening in other parts of the world, certainly can have an effect. There again, I don't know if I would be looking anybody in the eye and giving them advice on it. I don't have a crystal ball. But I know that from the bidding aspect, we're probably at one of the higher points right now and the most fluctuation that I've seen in the last 45 years.
Great, thank you. Mr. Casey, I think you're next.
Yeah, just a couple of questions.
Am I still on the stand here? Or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
There were a couple of numbers shared, just preliminary, last week. There was a 13% number, not the 25%. Where's the gap in the 13% versus the 25% over budget?
Well, I think that, and Christine, I can speak to it if you want to come up, you're certainly
Yeah,
more than
I think
welcome.
the community, I think we just want to share and make
Yeah,
sure
I
we
think it was
put everything on the
over
table.
what was borrowed and what our total borrowing was. So when we based the original, well, why don't I let you go? You put the charts together today.
So.
Can I just say something real quick here? You gotta separate the bond funding from the construction costs. That's where the confusion's coming in. Separate the two, and you'll understand that the funding has nothing to do with what
I'm
we
not
borrowed.
confused. I'm asking for this to be shared with everybody.
Okay, I thought you were.
No, thanks. Go ahead.
Is that the right slide that you want to
Yes,
address?
so this is the slide that we prepared for today's presentation. So what this slide is saying is that, as you know, the $40 million was already rounded up by about $500,000 from the original estimates. So the original estimates came in less than 40 million, but we rounded up to borrow an even 40 million, okay? So the 25% versus the 23%, that's kind of the difference. So the very first slide where we showed that the costs came in, this was the second slide, was 25% over that original May 21 budget. So the the March 21 estimate is what the district used to determine the debt parameters that we were going to have to go out for debt. We rounded up. So when we looked at phase one overall, it was the high school additions and renovations, the fields, and that was the 40 million we were talking about. So that was about $500,000 round up to get to the 40. And then if you want to go down to the next slide. Okay, one more. Okay, so then the 45 million came in with $3 million of potential escalation costs that I spoke with Mr. Martin at the time, was the finance chair, and he anticipated that the escalation would occur. So we added $3 million onto the borrowing, and then the $2 million, we were already kind of in the process of looking at potential land purchase for phase two, not knowing exactly what that would look like. So the additional $5 million came into play, and that's what the board voted on to go out for new debt. And how that was distributed then is the high school renovation to the total original 40 was about 86% of that funding package, with the other 14% being in the high school field. So that's how, when you look at the line in orange, and also even the line in yellow, so the roundup included whatever we rounded up to is a little over $500,000. We put 86% of that to the high school and 14% to the fields. The same then with the $45 million borrowing. $2 million was set aside as potential land purchase per discussions with Mr. Martin, and we shared with the board what our intention was there, and the other three being split 86 and 14% in the other two projects. So the 23% is actually the difference in the cost over the $40 million of borrowing, which is a little more than the original budget, so that's why it's only 23% over. And then the 15% is the percentage over the $45 million as allocated out per my methodology of 86 and 14, with the land being incorporated into there being 14% then over our original thought process.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that original budget was pre-COVID. To your point, Mr. Simcox, materials may fluctuate, lumber has come down, but labor I think the market has corrected itself, and labor is not coming down. Hourly wages have gone up. Those aren't backing down, so I'm not quite sure if we reset the budget based on today's dollars, whether it's today, in a year, or 2 years. I think at best, we may get 5% out of it. We may save 5%, or it may be even higher. So I think the real question to the community is, based on what we see here, and hopefully, maybe we can talk about our legal time constraints with regard to responding to bids. I don't know if that was extended or not. But what I would have liked to have seen tonight is, based on this, an option of what this would do to our taxes, our budget, and some options there, so we can actually have an intelligent conversation for going back to the public and seeing how much of a palate the public has for continuing on this effort. There were surveys that were done that safety was extremely important to this district, and a couple of other things. Is it still important in the district? If we kick the can down the road 2 years, 3 years, and start building schools and buying land and doing a high school project, we are setting ourselves up for failure. So I think if this project, my opinion, if this is not going to get done now, it's not going to get done for a long time. And how does the public feel about that? I think that's the question. But you can't really have that question, pose out another survey between now and our legal deadlines to see, hopefully we can, to see what our community feels or thinks about that.
If I may, based upon this meeting, and Mr. Moravich, I would probably defer to somebody in your organization to see what it would take if we had to defer bids. That's the actual bid document. States have to decline or award within 30 days, which is pretty typical. It can't be, you usually want time to go over everything, and we spanned everything out that we had 2 weeks for the documents to be reviewed by the solicitor. If it's something, I don't know if it's possible. I can't tell you that. It's not. It's probably not normal, but it doesn't hurt to ask if that's what you're asking me to do.
So my understanding is we can't do that. I mean, you've think of an auction situation, or somebody's made a proposal to you. It's locked to a particular period of time, so you can't lock them in past that deadline.
And I don't know that they would be held accountable for their pricing if we didn't award within the 30 days. They would have.
You're the moving part. I mean, you're talking about the moving parts issue. I mean,
Right.
Just so everyone understands, and I'm sure a lot of people here do, that contractor has then contracted with multiple subs who has also agreed with that contractor to lock in their pricing for that period of time. So that's the difficulty. You would effectively have to rebid the project, and then, that's, I can tell you from experience, and I'm sure you have many more than me, that's always sometimes it comes in a little better, and sometimes it comes in way off the charts. So and I think Dr. Faley focused in on, I don't think there's anybody in this room that has this expertise to know where everything's going, but I mean, I was just looking, as Ed was discussing it, I don't know if prevailing wage, I think maybe twice in history of keeping prevailing wages it went down. It doesn't basically happen. So it's not very often. There has to be a major type of recession where there's but
So based on what I'm seeing, Mr. Case, is the kind of escalation, in my experience in building projects from this chair, the kind of escalations that we're seeing in copper and oil-based products are unheard of escalations. So is there a chance that those are going to peak and come down as lumber has? Absolutely. Absolutely. There is an optic that probably will occur. I do agree with you on the prevailing wage and the costs with wages. I don't think we're going to see much movement on that issue over the course of the next several years. The legalities associated with accepting or rejecting bids, I mean, unfortunately, we didn't make those laws. Those laws were put into place to protect the individual contractors that bid these projects and spent, a lot of money to put these bid specs together. And to Mr. Simcox's point, this is what he used to do for a living. So as a contractor, you expect to get some jobs, you expect some to be rejected based on the prices that are coming in. So I want to go back to the optic of the escalation in price percentage-wise, whether you use the $40 million figure or the $45 million figure. That's a significant escalation above what we would normally anticipate in a bid process. And I do not personally believe or professionally believe that it is appropriate for us to have conversations about spending taxpayer dollars. You're right, we can't survey the community in less than 4 days on this particular issue. It's just impossible. We have to go with the information that we have and make the best decisions and recommendations to be good stewards for the future. Whether the board decides to accept or reject the bids, we do know one thing: this project is way over budget. And those are the facts, and nobody is responsible for that that's sitting in this room. Those are factors that we did not have control over. You know, the pandemic, the economy, the state of supply chains in the world based on current situations that are going on globally. I can't anticipate those, nor can Mr. Simcox, nor can this board, but all we can do is go through and do our due diligence as professionals. Our team has spent many, many hours inside my office having very difficult conversations about this recommendation. And we believe that the recommendations that we're giving are very, very sound recommendations for this community. So
I appreciate that, Dr. Faley. You've left the board 4 days to make a determination to do this. Our runway is used up. We cannot go back to the community now and understand how much of a palette we have.
Well,
The
Mr.
budget
Case,
was pre-COVID. If this is important, it's worthy of going back to the community to understand whether people want to take this on or not. So here we are. We have 4 days left to make a decision.
Okay, so, Mr. Case, to your point, and I will respectfully disagree with that I've left the board a short runway, because we've spent in excess of 40-plus hours getting to the point on a very complex bidding project to come to this board with an understanding of where we currently stand from the optic of the amount of money it's going to cost to get this project to its conclusion. So we certainly could survey the community, but when push comes to shove, the question is this: is the community willing to spend 25% more for this project to come to finality, inclusive of what we initially stated were going to be the parameters of phase one of this project, including the field project, which we're not even having a conversation on tonight, because the amount of money that we are over budget for just the renovations and addition project leaves that as a moot point. So the question that you're requesting us to survey is whether or not the community would support additional borrowing to get this project completed. We certainly can survey the community on that specific question, but I think we all know the answer to that. I don't, at least I think I know the answer to that. I won't speak for the community, but we're talking about $6.5 million.
I don't want to put Jeff on the spot, so I'm going to speak a little bit. Other than Jeff, I think next in line that knows most about construction would be myself. I've been in it for 30 years, 40 years. And you got to look at what's happening out in the world today. We talk about prevailing wages going up. Yes, they are, but I just got off a call today at 1 o'clock. We're doing construction projects in Texas, a few other places. And the general consensus by people that are a lot smarter than me is that in states where there's prevailing wages, the decreases in the cost of materials will offset any increase in the prevailing wages. In states where there's not a prevailing wage, you'll be far better off waiting 2 years. That's what we're looking at. So however you want to slice and dice that, I don't want to put, Dr. Fagg, I don't want to put him on the spot because he's trying to present something that we have a short time window because of the way the contracts are written. I personally, listen to these people at 1 o'clock. They're economics people and majors and all sorts of people. And I have to, as a bank and as bankers, you look at these and you listen to these folks and you try to make the best decision of what to do. And like I said, I firmly believe that too, because I think, and I'd say, I don't want to put Jeff on the spot here, but you saw the price of lumber. The lumber house coming down substantially. That's anticipated for concrete, steel, because they're at their peaks. And there's already, if you've been following the economic news, housing starts are starting to worry people, pushing us into a recession. They're already off their peak, they're coming down. And that's a great concern because now you have two issues. You have an inflation that's ramping up, but then you have the potential for the housing industry to collapse, which creates deflation. So does anybody have a crystal ball? No, that's not a fact, but I firmly believe, based on my knowledge, that in 2 years, if you wait 2 years, there'll be no price differential, or possibly less. And I don't know, Jeff, you want to, I'm not, putting you on the spot, but that's my belief.
Yeah, there again, and one thing with is, I believe, everybody here has a little bit of knowledge about the prevailing wage system. So what happens with that is we see, like if you go down there and you see signs out for people that are paying $20 an hour that only were paying $12 an hour maybe a year ago to get people in. Prevailing wages, their corrections are much slower. So when you go into the L&I website and you put prevailing wages into a project, you'll get a project name and number, and then it's based upon more so union rates, I'll say. So that's a guarantee that those people have to make that rate. So if you have an employee and you want to pay him 12, you can't. You have to pay him what the prevailing wage and the benefit package are. So that. So at any rate, so they are slower to increase, but they have reconfigured sometimes, which means that if you have a guy that's doing steel work, you might have a ground guy that they reclassify, and that gentleman or person, it could be a woman, would make a different rate based upon their task. But I've never seen the rates themselves come down, because once they go in and they'll project out about maybe 5 years on an L&I pay scale. So you have to use the appropriate year for the appropriate wage. So like right now, they're bidding off of what would be like, maybe 20, 22, 23 rates. So once they're set, that's what they have to do. It's a rate that's given to them off of L&I. It's not something that the contractors have any control over. So while we see some people saying, short term, they're willing to pay $40 an hour to get somebody to come do task XYZ, they could, if the economy dives, they could say like, well, we don't need you anymore, or would you be willing to take, $20 an hour? That's the free open market. Prevailing wages don't have that luxury. That's basically, once you have a rate, for the most part, that's the rate that's set, and that's the rate that you continue to have. So there's an employer can't say, well, I'll offer you less to keep your job. I'm not saying some don't, but they can't legally do that. So prevailing wages are just a little bit different, whether it's Davis-Bacon or L&I, and then HUD's a completely different scenario.
So if I may, just only because Mr. Martin jumped in, and appreciate his comments, and it does provide some insight regarding where we may be a year or 2 years from now based upon his conversations and discussions in his field. And speaking to what Mr. Case had indicated about concerns of timing of everything, all we can do at this point, understanding, is that we don't have bids yet for our field projects. Based upon what we do have here in terms of the estimates for the high school renovation project, and based upon money available for the land purchase, it still puts us within the parameters of that $45 million, is understanding that that's what we would be voting upon next week, next Monday, and that putting out a survey, as we know that those bids for the fields don't come in for several more weeks, to continue to have some of those discussions about, again, an appetite for whether there would be additional borrowing or not. We know that the debt service of the $45 million is anticipated to be extended a number of years, but does not change our current debt service, which is, I believe, just south of $11 million a year. So that's not really changing debt service year over year. Perhaps then there is some additional conversation within the community in terms of knowing that we would be putting ourselves at about $6 million short of these two projects, having that put out there for the community's consideration, and when those bids actually do come in for the field renovation projects, you know, we will have a better understanding in terms of whether or not we certainly have some feedback from the community about that deficit for expected spending, and would give us some direction in terms of what we would be looking at for that decision on the fields project, just to kind of put that out there. Not suggesting in any way that that means that we should approve or not approve these bids next Monday, but that unfortunately, with the timing of everything, kind of puts us in a difficult position in saying that this is an all or nothing type of proposition with these projects. The hopes was that we would be addressing all of this together, but the way that the timing of the bids have come in, you know, we are essentially looking at a project as it stands right now, excluding the high school baseball and softball fields project, puts us within the parameters of what we originally authorized borrowing for and purchase of land. Again, just for consideration, you know, between now and Monday's board meeting.
Well, I just want to, I agree with Jay saying, what the problem is, the 45 million was really 43 million or 42.5. So when we borrowed this money, that included the fields. This project with the fields will be about $52 million. So we'll be $12 million over what we originally, actually $12.5 million over. So what I'm saying is I don't think anybody in the public is going to want to see a 25% increase. I agree with Ed that this should be hashed over. So all I'm trying to say is I don't agree with voting on this on Tuesday, but on Monday, but we have to. But I don't be pushing the corner saying we know better than what the public wants. I don't think the public wants a project going from $33 million to $42 million and a half. I don't, for no beneficial cause. I mean, it's not a need, it's a want. I agree. When this project started, it was like $2.2 million in renovations to the auditorium, which everybody has agreed into. Then we did this study, and it blossomed to new office spaces, new this, new that. Those are wants. Those aren't needs. The auditorium does need work. There's no question about that. To go out and spend almost $52 million for no educational benefit is questionable. And the $45 million, like I said, was borrowed. And I take responsibility for that, bumping that number up to 45, because I knew we were talking about $2 million in land, and I figured that to be safe, so we didn't have to go back out to the market again to borrow more money, so we could lock in a decent rate. I said, let's make it to 45. So I take full responsibility for that. But as chair of the finance committee for many, many years, I can't support spending up to $52 million on projects that do not contribute to the educational process.
So I'll take my turn. I don't totally agree that it doesn't add to the educational process, because I think that the arts are a really important part of the whole child and the student's experience in school. I do think I agree with you about wants versus needs, though, and I do think there are two pieces of this project that are absolutely needs. And the top one, if we took a survey right now, I guarantee the top concern would be the connection of the two buildings. So across the board, like across the entire community, would be the safety concern with connecting the two buildings. The other need, which may be a 50-50 split, is, as I do agree that we need upgrades to the auditorium and especially backstage, which is also a safety concern. My question is, Dr. Faley, at different points during the project, you've used the term value engineering. So I guess my question is, for what we had put out to bid as the whole package, is there still room to value engineer within that? Or would we have to go out to bid for a project which we would change the scope on in order to value engineer?
Well, currently, the project has been bid with certain specifications. So the answer to your question is, in a nutshell, is no, not with the current bid specs that have been put out. And the timeline of the 30 days has started. But I do want to draw some attention to the asterisk that is on option 2, because I think that's where there is an opportunity for the board, and why I'm so strongly urging my recommendation in this light. What I've heard this evening is, and what we've shared with you, is we can't get everything we wanted based on the information that we've received in the pricing from the bids. But that doesn't mean that the board can't go through another bidding process to redesign the project, to scale back on some features, to look at designing the project in a different way that may not accomplish everything that we put into the bid specs, and revisit the current priorities that we have in this project, specifically the high school addition and renovation and fields. So my recommendation is based on the fact that we could wait and go through another process to value engineer, to your point, the design of this project, to scale back, to make it less expensive than what we know it is now, and perhaps with the funds that we have set and we have borrowed, accomplish more of what we set out to do because the project is built on safety, it's built on performing arts, and it's also built on the fields. So a redesign could look a whole lot different and give us another piece of information to consider as a board, and to give us the time to really assess, to Mr. Case's point, he makes a valid point, our community knowing that we can't afford to do what we said we wanted to do, is there another plan that they would support, given the money that we've already borrowed for this particular project? And that's why I landed with the recommendation that you see there, is because I think there are some things that we can do. You know, Mr. Simcox has a number of years in this district. Connecting the two buildings has been a conversation that's been going on for 15 years, and I believe that he had provided some ideas for that previously. Maybe there's a way we could use the existing space in the auditorium and connect the safety features, make it much more modernized for our community, and show and demonstrate to our community that we're not spending money because we borrowed it, we want to spend it wisely, and perhaps we need to scale back.
Well, and my main point in that, obviously, the safety is the main issue. But if this project does escalate to possibly 52 million, which is what it would include, if you're including everything that the original plan including the fields, I don't want that to limit our borrowing power or our realistic borrowing ability when it comes to phase 2 then. So I don't want, yes, we're solely talking about phase 1 right now, but I don't want that to impact the ability for us to then focus on the overcrowding issue at elementary schools and bypass that because we don't have the ability to then borrow the money we need for that project. So I think it's important that we all kind of have, yes, this is the scope we're looking at right now, but have both of those projects in mind as we're moving forward, that one doesn't kind of bump the other one out of the running or push that even further than what it has already been pushed.
And again, I'll go back to the asterisk. The board may want to look at the priorities of when things are accomplished moving forward. Obviously, that conversation is going to take more than just our work session this evening, if that's something the board is truly interested in looking at. Priorities as a whole for phase 1 and phase 2 are on the table for conversation. I want, as superintendent, to accomplish everything, but seeing the numbers the way I'm seeing them, maybe we need to shift our priorities, or at least have a conversation about those priorities and what comes first and what comes second in additional conversation with this board.
Can we, can you help us understand how much we've spent so far on architectural fees and permits, et cetera, and what's a sunk cost and what's not? If we would start from ground zero all over again and go through this process?
Yeah, certainly. So we own the design for what we currently have. And I believe the dollar, and correct me if I'm off, Mrs. Schlossman, I believe it's about $1.9 million that have been expended between the two. Correct. 1.9? 1.5 for the high school and 0.4 for the field. Okay. So in total, 1.9.
I just want to make a comment. I think everybody's for connecting the schools. That's been on the board for about more than 15 years. The reason that I think, Sean, you mentioned, about past boards. There was reasons why that was. We couldn't get a permit to do that. With this, they at that point in time, they needed a fire lane going back between the schools. A whole lot of things came into play that did not allow us to proceed with that project. And there's no question with what's been designed now and the borough and the council willingness to work in those directions. I think, not one person on this board would not want to move forward with connecting the buildings. But as the overall budget concerns grow, I think there's ways of looking at the pieces and trying to accommodate the needs. And I guess more or less I'm saying scaling it down, but the money that would be saved, if there's money that's saved, different priorities could be addressed. I mean, there's issues at Southern, there's potential issues with elementary school. I mean, there's a lot of things that we could take a look at, down the road, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands. Everybody here is for safety, I'm for safety, and I don't want anybody to think just because I'm saying to reject the bids that I'm against being safe, but I think in the meantime, we could hire, if there was really safety concerns, you could hire some extra security guards until we have something in place to mediate and move forward. That's it.
Who was after me? I don't remember. Oh, Mr. Martin, are you done? Are you good?
Mr. Martin, do you have any other comments you want to make before we move on to the other board members that
No,
haven't
thank you.
spoke yet?
No, I spoke enough.
Dr. Kennedy, would you like to go next?
I'm sitting here thinking about our original timeline. If this was our pre-COVID timeline, we would be halfway through building an elementary school right now. And it's just disappointing. I'll echo a little bit of what Mr. McCray and what Mr. Case said. I feel like past boards have put us in a terrible position where they have kicked the can down the roads. And this project in the high school should have been built 10 years ago. The elementary school should have been built 10 years ago. And I think of how much less expensive it would have been to build them 10 years ago and saved us millions and millions and millions of dollars. I don't know that it's ever gotten cheaper to do anything in time. And no one, like we said, has a crystal ball, and no one can tell how it's going to look 6 months or a year down the road. But what I do know is that these are not wants, these are needs. Our community has said overwhelmingly that the high school, the way it is set up, is unsafe. The second thing that our community said is that our schools are crowded. Both our elementary schools and our high school are crowded, and they want smaller class sizes. That's what our community told us over 2 years, 3 years ago now. And I don't want to be part of the problem where we're kicking it down the can down the road. We've been at this now. I've been on the board 4.5 years. We started this conversation the minute I became a board member, and it's been taking, while it's amazing that we've been so thorough, our thoroughness kind of bit us in the hiney right now. Because had we moved a little bit faster, we would have a lot different pricing than we do now. So for me, I am nervous about waiting because we have the bond is at a great rate. We have a need, both a safety need and an educational need for both phases of the project. And if history is any example, the longer we wait to do this, the more expensive things will get.
Mr. Schneider?
I don't know who to look at for this
I was
question.
going to say, should I?
I don't know. Grants, I'm sure were part of your discussion into finding ways to offset some of the costs through grants. Can someone speak to that part of the process?
Yes. We did explore the potential ability to secure some grants to assist us with some of the expenses associated with items at the lower house, specifically HVAC. And I'll ask Mr. Simcox to talk about his conversation with connection with a person who is a grant writer and has done some high-level work at the national level. And what we found was there aren't any grants available. But do you want to speak a little bit to the individual and the qualifications of who we tapped into to try to scour for any potential ways that we could receive grant funding to mitigate some of the costs we've seen through the bid process?
Sure. So I reached out to, basically, we have a company that we employ for maintenance for larger items, and they've hired a grant writer. So, I mean, my experience is typically a grant writer works on commissions. They actually hired him. So as a concession to the school district, they had their guy look into it who was writing some, as Dr. Faley said, some very high level. He went down through and exhausted everything. They got back to me last week as we were still trying to compile with the alternates for the HVAC system. So the lead programs for lighting, some of the HVAC, the weatherization programs, there's always different grants out there. Infrastructure is really big right now. They were not able to find anything for weatherization for us for the heating, windows, or weatherization for the lower house at this time. You know, I mean, things are ever evolving, as you know, with grants. They changed often, and I can't tell you that something isn't going to come down the road, but as we went down through, so when the prices came in, I thought we would, you know, I would explore that, and I had pretty high hopes that we would find something, even if it's just a windows and a weatherization type project, but they have found nothing at this point yet. And if I may, Mrs. Cocker, just on the value engineering, a lot of that, believe it or not, was done as we were working through this. I mean, it was a lot of hours, days and nights, just trying to make sure that we weren't going to get hit with change orders and making sure that whatever we did was the best value. As piping changed like copper, we pulled it out, we went to CPVC. We hit, doing the geotechnical borings, we hit unsuitable soils in some of the areas where we already have underground water storage systems. So in the base bid, we have up to 8 foot of over excavation in that, so we don't get hit with extras later. So it doesn't make the number down like the value engineering down. So like terrazzo and some of the floorings, we went with LVT, which is a very durable, it's listed as luxury vinyl tile, heavy, thick vinyl flooring. We have been chipping away at everything possible without compromising the integrity of the buildings. So we've been trying. And, you know, part of that, even with the contingency, we have a contingency in, so we're not surprised and not cut down to the dollar. So if we hit something that would conceivably be something that could be construed as an extra, that there's funding into that. Doesn't mean we intend on spending it, but so we've been trying to exhaust every avenue as far as that goes.
Mrs. Casper?
Well, I had one other follow-up. Yeah, sorry. No, that's okay. If we were to vote yes, we would break ground when?
2 days after graduation.
Right. So, and then the duration of the build process is roughly,
With the add deduct alternates, it falls somewhere between December and April. The April was with all of the alternates in, we would be hitting December, January of 2023.
okay. And so, since this is my first construction project, given that I only got on in the end of 2019, as the cost, if material costs would go down after we started the process, that would make our costs less expensive, correct? Or we're locked in at this price?
Oh, no, we would have to throw the bids back and start over with the design that we own that was going on. You know, Crabtree was employed here when I came here, and the feasibility study that was happening. So, like, everything that's there now, what they're looking at for pricing, is owned by the Wilson School District.
So,
No.
in other words, if we accept the bids, and that's something certainly the board can do, we're locked into the pricing that the contract, the general contractor and all the subcontractors, primes have submitted.
So I guess my question is, even if material costs would go down, it would not save us any money?
Actually, did you? I don't know if you're familiar with it. There's something called force majeure, which allows contractor to go back in. We've eliminated some of those items so we don't get stung later. So in doing that, to go back and negotiate for lesser material prices, or if we change something as we're going in and do a deduct change order, that we find something that we can save on, that certainly would be a topic of conversation. To go back in and ask them to go down through, typically, and rightfully so, they're going to tell us the hardships that they've hit and where they've spent additional monies, and probably not be, it's very uncommon. I mean,
Mr. Maravich, can you speak to the legalities of the force majeure and how difficult that would be to provide a legal argument for? I mean,
Yeah, I wouldn't address it that way, and I apologize, but legally, that's the bid. So that is what they're being paid. With that runs the risk that they've estimated what the cost is going to be when they need that, because, again, this is this isn't going to be done tomorrow, so it goes through a process. So they've estimated when their purchases will be delivered, what their costs are going to be, and they've put that in their bid price. So in the same sense, if for some reason a certain commodity dropped to a third, we don't get that benefit, nor do they get the benefit if it went up a third. So the risk is, that's why this process, and as I think Jeff was saying, I mean, they spend sometimes thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in just one bid because they've got people who are estimating when they're going to need lumber, when they're going to need roofing, and then going out to all those subs, all those vendors, and getting pricing that those vendors lock in. But yeah, we don't get the,
So in other words, the price is the price.
yes, sorry.
Got it, thank you.
Pretty much.
I am not going to pretend to be an expert on budgeting construction, so thank you for your diligence. And
Me either, no.
what I do know, just being married to a local businessman, is that for the past couple of years, the constant has been uncertainty in the economy, whether you're talking wages or just supplies, and not even just the wages for the labor, but just the inconsistency in the labor itself, and being able to access, quality labor. So I don't, as many of us have said, none of us have a crystal ball to really predict what's going to happen in the economy. What I do know is, when we talk to teachers and we talk to folks in some of the schools, that, a very consistent grievance is that, the buildings are overcrowded and we really need, the space for our growing district. And I think that's been consistent over the years. Like Bob, I got here in 2019. This is my first construction. So I'm learning a lot as I go. The questions that I had, a lot of them have already been answered. But my biggest question was, where can we reduce any of the price? Is there any way we can accept some, reject others, and be able to prioritize some of the projects, which we've already kind of talked about, the possibility. My question is, if we did reject the bids, how long until we can get to, A, the Fields projects, and then later down the line, Phase 2? I'm just thinking in terms of timeline, how this will set us back even further.
As far as the funding for the Fields projects, they're due in on the 8th of April. And there again, we would have, a window of time to do a decline or award, and also to pick some of the alternates as we've prescribed, bathrooms, some of the different entities that we got down as to what wish lists are and what the true intent, or what we'll get down to, if we want to call it needs. But the base of the premise of turf fields, we'll have some time to sort of, navigate through that. That's a far less complicated project. That's it's pretty much, it's fields, bathrooms, lighting. It's not a whole lot of moving pieces. The moving pieces to the high school project are much more in-depth. Like I said, I think we've whittled it down for what we originally got as or what I got as the original intent. We've really kind of made sure that we took out anything unnecessary or made it add or deduct alternates. So there is some choices to it, not just that we're kind of committed to take visions of grandeur. So we have this broken down this way. I don't know that there's a whole lot more I mean, when you get into the masonry facade, the price per square foot of brick, everything like that, the roofing, it's not like there's, like I said, Terrazzo has priced itself out of the industry right now. It's extremely expensive. It's a great product, but we've gone to LVT, so we've, done some different things and to
So,
kind of value.
Mr. Simcox, even though we don't have, we haven't opened bids on the field projects, we have spent a considerable amount of time doing estimates for what we anticipate those costs to be. And based on the estimates that we've discussed and the hours that you've spent in the estimates that have been provided to the board, we're pretty comfortable that we're going to be in very close proximity to what we anticipate on bid opening day.
Well, the number that we have there, I believe, 6,930,000 is my estimate. So I put that together based upon that. I will say that what I put together for the high school project, as we were whittling things down, I was within, I think, 2%. That's luck, that's not skill. But with the fields, that's with the bathrooms and the moving of the bleachers and little entities in and out, the lighting, permitting. I'm using 1% as a building permit fee, and all of the inspections, and then some contingency money that's put in there. So that's my number. Where the real bids will come in, we have yet to see. I don't know where, but it's not going to be drastically different, I don't think.
The final piece that I want Mr. Maravich to address is, the board went out and secured bonds in the amount of $45 million. And I think it's important to understand that when we secured those bonds, the costs associated and the interest rates associated with those bond borrowings were at unprecedented lows. So the question that I think the community and the board needs to hear is, so in the event, as a board member, I am trying to process what to do, accept or reject the bids on April 4th. Are there penalties associated with not expending the funds right away? What legal parameters are we held to in terms of those bond monies? How long can the board, if they choose to, not expend those monies? All of those questions, I think, are key into understanding and sharing with the community as to what that looks like moving forward. But what we do know at the current time is from our bond counsel is that interest rates will be rising in the very near future on bond borrowings. The board borrowed money at very low interest rates to identify needs that we're going to need to consider moving forward. So what happens, Mr. Maravich, to those dollars?
I think the board did get the legal analysis. Ellen Enters is Hvac Rothschild's one of Hvac Rothschild's bond counsels who works closely with Wilson, with Christine. So she did outline, which Dr. Faley, I think, shared with the board. There's kind of two tests. One test is, but we meet both tests. But the first test is whether we had a reasonable, we were reasonably borrowing money for a project, and that needs to be then spent in 3 years. That test, though, takes place when you're borrowing the money. So this was not anything that anybody could have foreseen. As I think I told Dr. Faley before, 25 years ago or so, there was a series of IRS investigations because school districts were borrowing money to make money in the market, and that's not, you can't do that tax exempt. That's not, people can decide to do that, but school districts can't decide to do that. So that clearly was not the intent. You would not have retained an architect, designed the plan, gone out to bid. So we meet that test. And the second test is just effectively whether or not you are in fact making interest. It is as I understand it from Ellen, the money is in a yield restricted account, and that therefore you would not be ever making money on the account. If you actually do not do any project, that would be that would take a yet further analysis, because then you need to refund those bonds. And there would be not penalties, but costs, because you're going to have to fund that until the yield date, and then at the yield date, you would call the bonds at the first available yield date. So there are no IRS penalties, but you effectively borrowed money, made representations to bondholders that they can make this interest rate for this particular period of time. So you can't really call those until the call date, so that means that money would have to sit there. In all likelihood, you're losing money on that. So what you've done is, think about it, if we borrow money and we stick in our savings account, we're generally not going to be making money. That's basically what you've been doing. So you would end up losing money, and then you would need to recall the bonds and pay the associated fees with that. But it's not a penalty from the IRS. Does that answer your two questions, or answer your question? Okay. But again, this is a very kind of, how can I say this, technical financial analysis that includes then both the legal IRS issues. But you're not in trouble with the IRS, because you were not trying to do anything funky here. You were obviously doing a project, and something like supply chains, cost, all of this is all reasonable and clearly unforeseeable when we started this project.
So if we wouldn't do anything, what would the penalty be? Is that $500,000? Is that $1 million? Is it $2 million? Rough number. Just so we understand, if we don't do anything, we've lost 1.9, and we may have a penalty here. So any savings, we may get back someday. We may lose due to all this other stuff. So just, can you give me a rough number?
So it's not, and I don't think anybody would have that number now. You would need to.
Approx. Is it 5 million? Is it
No,
half a
no, it's
million?
less than a couple hundred thousand.
That would be
Couple
like,
hundred thousand,
that would be like,
okay.
yeah, but you're basically trying to guess what the
Trying to
interest.
understand.
You're guessing what the interest rates are going to be on your account versus what the interests are you're paying on the bonds. You would have to calculate that out, as I understand it. That would be the scenario. So you would have to go to the call date with that money sitting, paying down the bonds, and then at the call date, you would, then you would pay the bonds down. So it would be the difference between the two interest rates over that time period, and then your cost of issuing the debt and the like, so.
If we were penalized, would it prevent us from being able to borrow?
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to, it's not a penalty, it's simply the cost of borrowing. So the cost of borrowing is that you borrowed money, you have it in a bank account, you're paying an interest to bondholders currently at a different rate than what the bank account is. If that continues, and it will undoubtedly, then that difference is what the cost of having that money. So that's not going to be able to be that's not going to be able to be paid off until the call date, because based on the way bonds work, you made a promise to those bondholders that they can get that rate to that first call date. There's some other, financial structures you may be able to work with financial advisors to do, but for the most part, in my expertise in the bond, and this, it's the difference in the interest rate plus the cost associated with issuing the debt.
Mr. Maravich, I have one additional question, and maybe some clarification from Hvac Rothschild on the contracts that we typically establish with the length of time that we have to review. The 30-day timeline versus the 60-day timeline, and specifically what is in the contract. We have based our timeline as an administrative team based on the 30-day timeline, which would be April 7th. A 60-day timeline would be obviously May 7th. Can you speak to specifically to the contract that was developed by Hvac Rothschild in working with the architect and the bid process? Because I want to be very transparent that our timeline to this board has been working to meet the confines of the 30-day timeline, which is April 7th. And if that contract does not say 30 days and it says 60 days, then I think we need to know that, because that is an important factor, because that gives us an additional time frame to continue to assess this particular issue. So can you speak to that? contract?
I will try. So and when I say this, you'll understand why I'm being hesitant. So what I did or have been doing was contacting one of the construction lawyers who worked on this. And what I also did, I can't pull up the whole bid package, which is on a specific site. I can't do that on this computer, but she sent me the language that she sent to the architect, and it would be 60 days. That's the Hvac standard time period. And I went, what I can pull up, because it's on the website for Wilson, I did pull up the ceramic tile project, which is just a small bid package, and looked, and that's the language that we have in our standard documents. So that all information was given to the architect, and it's my understanding that that was all accepted by the architect and not changed back to 30 days. But I would have to physically look at that section. I mean,
Yeah, at this point, I
I don't have that to be able to look at, but I can tell you from what was sent to me by email just literally minutes ago, that language that was sent has it as 60 days, and it's 60 days, and actually has they're under the Withdrawal Act of Pennsylvania, it can become 120 if there's certain intervening things that need to happen from other agencies. So my understanding is it's 60 days, but I apologize, there's no way sitting here I can pull up the bid package to look at that.
It's my understanding right now, and I apologize for texting here at the podium, but this is very important. So while Crabtree Roybaugh's contract documents were 30 days, that's what we were working off of. As we went down through, and the final documents sent out by Jennifer Hanlon at Fox Rothschild, she just confirmed that we were able to get the 60 days in. So I do believe we have a little bit more time. That was not the original Crabtree thing. So fate, you can call it whatever you want, but right now, and I'm going to clarify and work on that tomorrow and give a definitive answer, but it looks like because of the modifications we did to their contract, which is typical, that was added in. We spoke about it and wasn't sure they would agree. Apparently, they agreed to it. I want to dot i's and cross t's, though, before I go any further with that.
So I'm going to, again, say that our consultation has been that we were under the parameters of getting this done by April 7th. So to Mr. Case's earlier point about the community and surveying the community, if that timeline is May 7th, then I would say absolutely yes, I have time, and my team has time to provide additional information to this board. So that is an important clarifying point, because at the April 7th deadline, I can guarantee you that our team would have been working diligently on this issue regardless of the timeline, but having 30 additional days to assess this, it would have been nice to know that before we had this work session this evening.
With that said, with the field bids come in on the 7th, so we can wait for those bids to come in and then make a determination for how we would word a survey? Maybe have another work session?
If you're telling me, if Fox Rothschild is stating that the contract gives us 60 days to award or reject bids, the answer to your question is yes.
When will we have a definitive understanding?
I'm going to ask I would ask for 24 hours, give me until like 5 p.m. tomorrow. The original contract was 30 days. We've read it out. We've been back and forth probably no less than 25 times with verbiage in the contract. It quite honestly, but as I was texting here, it's my understanding right now that they have accepted the contract we put in with the 60 days. Does that sound right?
Yes, and I know this sounds very confusing.
So that's a change from the original contract
Correct. So-
documents, but if it's
so-
accepted, we have 60 days.
Just, again, hopefully, I'll try to be short. The architect prepares a whole set of documents that have, thousands of pages. The lawyers, good lawyers at least, involve themselves in the first couple sections. They are the legal terms. They are the bids, or they're the bonds, they're the instructions to bidders, and their legal parameters, just like this issue. because when it's a giant package like this is, we send them changes where we say, substitute this paragraph, substitute that paragraph. If they don't agree with us, then they respond and say, we're not agreeable to do that. We don't have any record of them agreeing not to. We do not have readily handy the multi-thousand page bid package. That could be downloaded, but as Jeff just said, the easiest way to get the answer on this, and my colleague is trying, she's reached out to multiple people at the architects to say, is there any confusion over this that the 60 days went in?
Yeah,
So
they're apparently looking at it, because I've got no answer either, so.
she didn't either yet. so.
Yeah, and which, at this time of the day, but that was not, that was an addendum placed, as I know we spoke about it. If it's in the contract, then we have the 60 days. So I'll have to look at that. So that was a modification to the architect's contract.
So if I could share some final thoughts, and then I'll be quiet on this. If we can wait till the 7th for field bids to come in, maybe
8th.
get together, whether it's publicly or with a couple of people, and what I'd like to present to the community, if we're going to go and do this, is this is our current thought, maybe an option or two. This is what it's going to cost. Maybe we can get some costs down based on what comes back from the field. And because you have to carefully figure out what kind of survey questions you're going to put out there. But if we don't have what this is going to cost the community, we shouldn't be sending the survey out at all. So this is a couple of options of what we want to do. This is what it's going to cost. This is maybe what it's going to do for taxes. Answer the question. What do you have an appetite for? So I know that's a lot to ask, and there's still a short runway, but is that feasible?
So if the bids are due back on the field projects on April 7th,
On the 8th,
April 8th.
yeah. But
So if the contract allows us to make the decision no later than May 7th, then I think it's feasible for us to put a one-page document together for the community and say, here's what the bids for the high school project renovations are, here's what the bids were, here's the total bids, here's the shortfall in what we have funding-wise, and gather some more information for the board to have to consider their final recommendation on the entire project.
I had a bond follow-up question. If we would not move forward with this, it was to Mr. Case's point about the debt servicing and paying back, and we were to go forward with, say, Phase 2 first, would we be able to use that money for that? It's not specifically earmarked for, okay.
The answer to your question is yes. You would be able to use the money as long as they are capital expenditures.
Yeah, the board resolution that you passed, that our bond counsel would have done, would identify projects, but then would also define it to be any other projects that meet the tax code requirements. So the answer is yes, you might have to pass a further board resolution, but it won't, the bonds it's already out there, so you should be fine. There shouldn't be any issues with that. And there's the other project, like the elementary school project, doesn't look, that's as tax exempt as the high school project is.
The extension of the deadline to May wouldn't change the pricing or anything on the bids, right?
No, it would just give the opportunity for us to share both sets of information before the board has to make a decision. Right now, the board, under the parameters that were shared with us for the April 7th deadline, the board has to either accept or reject the high school bids without having the information on the field project bids. So it'd give the board some time to assess both sets of information and for us to get additional information to clarify any board member questions. Any final comments from members of the board? All right, thank you very much for your time this evening, and we will be communicating with you as soon as we clarify the answers to the questions that came up tonight. Thank you.